Thank you everyone for joining the Early Stage Therapeutics panel at Digital Resi January. Today, we have five very distinguished panelists who are eager to share about their insights and perspectives on the investment in the early stage therapeutic space. So with that, I want to turn it to Cynthia Tsai from Viva Bioinnovator, who will be moderating this session. And Cynthia, I will leave it up to you.
Thank you, Jessica. So first of all, welcome, and thank you for all the panelists as well as the audience to participate in today's panel. My name is Cynthia Kai. I'm a venture partner for Viva Bioinnovator. And today, we have a very distinguished panel here to share with us about the early stage therapeutic investment. And the title is Bring the Newest Therapy to Clinic. And the panelists have a pretty wide variety of experience. We have from early stage investors to business development to post-investment supporting role, as well as merger acquisition veterans. And from the technical perspective, we have experts from stem cell to small molecules to biologic to diagnostic. So as we can see, is a pretty wide variety of background as well as experience here. So today, what we are trying to accomplish is to give startup companies a sense of early stage investors, how they evaluate opportunities and what are the investment criteria of different kind of investors. And our panel will also share the current early stage investment landscape as well as the outlook. And before the end of the session, I will ask each of the panelists to also provide some do and don'ts for the entrepreneurs. Hopefully you get some practical tips during your journey of developing the therapeutics here. So when we get started, I would like to invite each of the panelists to introduce yourself, probably spend a minute or two to introduce yourself as well as the firm you are representing. How about we start with Sanjay, since you are not on mute, yeah?
Okay, yeah, thank you, Cynthia. And thanks to all the panelists for participating in this event. I work with Otsuka Pharmaceutical in the US offices. We are based in Princeton. But today I am going to represent one particular initiative of Otsuka Pharmaceutical that is known as McQuaid Center for Scientific Research and Development, acronymed MSRD. This is an organization which has been created in 2020, and we have already made a couple of investments in last year. And we are also actively looking for investments in the area of opportunity to invest in the area of CNS and nephrology, which are completely aligned with Otsuka's growth strategy in the year 2030 and beyond. So that's in short what we are doing right now. And my particular role in MSRD and Otsuka is in due diligence and business negotiation. When it comes to the deals, I actively participate in the negotiation process, and by that, I have closed some of Otsuka's alliance and acquisition deals over the last 4 to 5 years. Thank you.
Great. Noel, how about you do next?
Sounds good. Thanks, Cynthia, and to all the Life Science Nation people that put this together. My name is Noel G, and I'm a principal with Illumina Ventures. I've been with our firm for 4 years. I'm a scientist by training, so I'm a chemical biology PhD. So you could probably imagine small molecules and pharmaceuticals are near and dear to my heart. At Illumina Ventures, we are a generalist fund within the life sciences with a focus on genomics. So we invest in therapeutics as well as diagnostics and life science tools, and some healthcare investments as well. My time here is roughly focused, roughly 50% on therapeutics and then 50% on other things. But just a little more about our fund. We are early stage investors. We like to be the first institutional check that goes into a company, be it in a Series A round, a Series B round, or a seed round, with a check size that tends to be between $5 and $10 million. But of course, we look to deploy more and support our companies with the follow-on investments over time. We are not focused on any given therapeutic area, so we look at everything. We've, currently are looking at some gene therapy and cell therapy companies for rare disease and oncology, but we've looked at autoimmune, cardiovascular, and CNS as well in the past. I'd say that if there's anybody who is interested in talking to our group, please feel free to reach out. My email is noel, Noel, at illuminaventures.com.
Great. So Owen?
Thanks, Cynthia. Hi, I'm Owen Smith. I'm Investment Director at 4Bio Capital. By training, I'm a microbiologist, spent a number of years working in labs in the UK before moving via the financial services route, working on corporate finance and M&A transactions in biotech into venture in 2014. Having previously worked at Arix Bioscience with emerging modality focused companies, things like Logic Bio, Autolus, I moved to 4Bio in 2017 and have worked closely with our team in the sourcing and transacting of early stage opportunities for our 4Bio Ventures 2 fund, which we're currently deploying, which is a $100 million fund focused on company formation, Series A and Series B opportunities in the advanced therapies space. For us, the advanced therapies are gene therapy, cell therapy, RNA technologies, targeted approaches, and microbiome. But for the benefit of people listening, we're interested in any therapeutics that aren't a small molecule agonist, antagonist, or naked monoclonal antibody. So particularly interested in things like oncolytic virology, PROTACs, ADCs, on top of those things that we've previously said. In terms of the way we are as a group, we are headquartered in London. We have a presence in Boston, Philadelphia, and Japan, and we're one of the first groups solely focused on the advanced therapy space. We're very happy to be very similar to Noel's group. Actually, we actually actively form companies, and I'm currently sitting as an executive chairman for one, and we're very happy to be joining at an early stage, right through from getting involved in actually negotiating licenses with universities to actually spending operational time within our companies, supporting them through seed, Series A, Series B. Our initial check size is around the $5 million, and we're happy to support a company through its life as we grow.
Great, wonderful. So Shyam, how about you give us an introduction?
Thank you, Cynthia, and thank you to the event organizers as well, and to the audience for listening in today. So my name is Shyam Patel, Director of Business Development at CIRM. We're a California state grant funding agency. And prior to CIRM, my background is in business development, bioengineering, and I ran a small medical device company and also was in the faculty at UC Berkeley prior to this. So with CIRM, as I mentioned, it's a California state agency. We have about $8.5 billion. We deployed $3 billion to date. In November, the voters of the state of California allocated additional $5.5 billion to help us advance our mission. And we're focused on accelerating the development of regenerative medicine therapies that include cell and gene therapies, as well as small molecules and biologics that target endogenous stem and progenitor cells. So we support everything from candidate discovery through clinical trials, and discovery stage projects about $1 million, and on clinical trials, we'll fund up to $15 million for a phase 2 trial. And we work with academics, small companies, public companies, the entire gamut. And so we're happy to discuss with anyone who's looking for funding, non-dilutive funding particularly, and is doing work in the state of California. Some projects that you might be familiar with that we funded the development of magrolimab, which is the antibody that 47 developed and was sold to Gilead. The company was sold to Gilead for $5 billion. Similarly, we also supported Velos Bio's antibody product that Merck acquired recently. So we do support biologics On the stem cell side, we supported projects from Rocket, Orchard, Sangamo, Fate, and so on. So we're definitely willing to speak to anybody who has cell and gene therapy projects in development.
Great. Thank you, Sean. So we all had the brief introduction here. So the next session, what I'd like to ask each of the panel is if you can share with our entrepreneurs who are the audience here, how your firm making the investment decisions, including some of the investment criteria. I know some of you already allude a little bit here, including such as the geographic preference, sectors, therapeutic areas, innovation or not, or financial or strategic kind of investment, things like that. And then right there, if you can also share or your thought or your advice to the entrepreneurs, what is the best way for early stage companies to get into the door to you? So maybe we start with Noah.
Yeah, Cynthia, that's a lot of questions packed in a couple of sentences. I think I'll try my best to answer at least some aspect of them. As I just mentioned, we look only into two therapeutic areas, CNS and nephrology. So our search is more focused than all of the other panelists. And we are, since this is a very niche initiative from OTSCA, we look into science that is new and novel. And we are looking mostly into small molecule kind of therapies. So having said that, we do not restrict ourselves to any geographies. In fact, we are speaking with companies which are not located in the United States at this moment. So we are open to any geographies. And in fact, the OTSCA scouting team, when it goes to various conferences and when it sees some opportunities that is more suitable towards MSRD, those scouts pass those opportunities to us. So if you are in Bio Europe or if you are in any other bio kind of conferences, and if there is an opportunity which fits MSRD, that reaches us. Having said through our scouts, if you have reached out to them, but if you want to specifically reach out to MSRD, then we already have a functioning website, msrd-us.com. And if you go to that contact page of that website, you will see an opportunity. You will find an opportunity to submit your proposal to MSRD. And if you do that, it directly reaches to our scientific and evaluation team, and we will start the evaluation from that point. So I would, stop here and, let the other panelists go over the other parts of your questions, Cynthia.
That's great. Noel?
Sure. So, we're an institutional fund, right? So we are purely a financial fund looking for financial returns for our companies. And I've mentioned before that we're not quite therapeutic area agnostic, but in general, we will entertain most therapeutic areas. I'd say that, two things, right? I mean, I assume that the vast majority of people viewing this particular panel are entrepreneurs. One thing I've got to note about my job and most people's job in this profession is to invest in great companies. And that means if you want to get in touch with someone like myself, it's not very hard. I gave out my email. I'll type it into the chat box later. I probably go through at least, I don't know, a dozen, maybe 20 different cold emails every day looking at companies that are sending me materials. I'm not saying I respond to everyone because there are clear fits and clear companies that don't actually fit our investment thesis, which you can find online on our website. But I will say that because the job is to find the next great company. It means I will scour the earth to find the next great company, and it can come in form of an introduction from someone that I know, which I think is the best way to be introduced to a venture capitalist. But it can also come from, you know, the hustle of the entrepreneur trying to reach out in whatever medium possible. I'd say the one thing that I hate is LinkedIn messages, because it's just a hard place to communicate. So my email is freely available. Please email me if you'd like to get in touch. Once you actually, you know, are in touch, and you know, I've reviewed some materials that you've sent over, and it looks interesting enough for a discussion post the pitch deck. Usually, you know, we go into a very early pitch with the company. A lot of companies get the first pitch. Many companies do not get a second pitch, right? So I think one key piece of advice about our process that I can tell you here is that if there is a hook for your company, at least for our group, it's data. So if you have kind of good data or fantastic data of some sort proving out your concept, that is something that we need to see before we would progress to the next stage. We're not here as super early stage investors just investing in seed companies with absolutely no data and with a promise of something. Unfortunately, that's not our risk profile, and there are many good investors out there that will take on those types of projects. But for us, we need to see some sort of biological proof of concept. And if you have it, there are a lot of companies that come in and for some reason choose not to share that. But if you have it, you need to have that kind of data hook to get us involved to the second meeting. So I'll pause there and let the other panelists speak, but I hope I answered some of Cynthia's questions.
Thank you. So Owen, how about you next?
Sure. So in terms of geographic preferences, I'm sitting and speaking to you from the UK. We're actually pretty geography agnostic. We're happy to invest into companies in Europe. We have presence in Japan, and in a normal world, I'd spend probably about half my time in the US. I think as a UK headquartered firm specialized in advanced therapies, we are somewhat less likely to join and be part of early stage transactions in Boston, as they probably have been around and spoken to a number of groups already. So we're probably, I'd say, companies outside of Boston in the US, anywhere in Europe and Asia, we're entertaining investments. We've exclusively focused on therapeutics. And I'll be open and honest, the reason we're focused on therapeutics is that is what we understand. I wouldn't have no idea where to start with the regulatory pathway for devices or digital programs. So we'll stick to what we know. In terms of therapeutic areas, I'm pretty agnostic and relaxed. There just has to be a real unmet medical need, and in emerging modalities such as cell therapy, gene therapy, and RNA targeting approaches, you really need to be using the right tool for the job. So for me, it's really important that someone who comes to me with a new story is able to compellingly show why the approach they're using to treat a disease is the right one for the job. It's not incremental, and it's going to make a meaningful difference. I will caveat that I think that it would be remiss of me to say that at this moment I'm particularly warm on investing into infectious disease. I think 2020 has been a very transformative year for that space. There's been a lot of investment, and rightly so. And as an early stage venture investor, I probably would let the record play for a period of time before I sort of dip my toe into that area. And I think that's a view that's shared by my colleagues, because there's so much innovation being nurtured and is well capitalized. That's some areas we focus on. I think being focused on the advanced therapies and it being somewhat differentiated to small molecule and naked monoclonal antibodies, where investors can be quite picky and say, we want to see a perfect suite of experiments. In the advanced therapy space, there was sort of 15 years where innovation was completely stifled after the unfortunate Jesse Gelsinger death. And so you found that advanced therapies, particularly cell and gene therapy, were advanced by academics who were very focused and very determined on a shoestring budget. And so it's very unlikely any story comes to us which is completely clean. It seems more and more often our job is to fill in the mosaic of what a clean regulatory program will look like. And I think my advice to anyone coming to an investor is to be open and honest. Don't hide what's missing. Embrace it and say, these are the experiments we need to run. These are what we ran as our controls. This is why we didn't include those. And the reason of we didn't have enough capital is entirely valid. And that helps really form a very grounded and sensible position to start a discussion with ultimately a person you will sort of get into bed with over the course of a company's development. So that's really where we're at. And sort of I will drop my email address into the channel. Very happy to speak to anyone who's interested to connect offline.
Great, thank you, Owen. How about Sean?
Thanks, Cynthia. So yeah, few questions there. I'll keep it simple. So we are a grant funding agency. So when it comes to the actual process of selecting what we fund, it's very similar to what the NIH does. We have an application process. You submit an application, a science-based review of your application, followed by our board making a programmatic review, and then it gets funded. And then we milestone out the award so that we use a milestone-based disbursement process, which helps keep a project on track and also reduces our financial exposure to a project. Having said all that, for prospective applicants who are looking into applying to CERM funding, all of our information is on our website. So all of our funding programs, how they can apply, the timelines, all of that is there. Every single past project we funded is also on there, including the scope of those projects and outcomes. All that information is there to access as well. And lastly, something that many are not aware of is that we have a dedicated staff who works with prospective applicants, helps them advise them on how to put forth a good application, how to even figure out research activities in California that may help them for some of the companies that are not in California. And we, on average, have our staff working with prospective applicants for 6 months to a year before they even submit an application. So, for example, if a company is in the IND stage and is looking to apply to CERM for clinical trial funding, they can engage fairly early on before even having developed their entire clinical trial protocol with CERM and have a kind of a streamlined pathway to applying down the road when they do get their IND active. So we encourage early engagement with our staff. Encourage you to look at our website for all the information on our funding programs, and lastly, to consider CERM as a funding mechanism for your company.
Thank you, Sean. So I will also share a little bit about the Viva BioInnovator. What is our investment criteria here? So as I said earlier, we are early stage therapeutic investors, and we really kind of, from the geographic perspective, mostly focus on in China and the US, but we do have in the portfolio have a company from Switzerland, so in the Europe as well. And from the indication perspective is we are only investing into the therapeutic area, not in diagnostic or device, but the indication is pretty broad, is really looking for the breakthrough, really have the great potential for the unmet medical needs. And our check size is somewhere between $500,000 to $5 million. We could take the lead, also could do the syndicate. And the major difference I think I want to point out as the Viva BioInnovator is since Viva BioInnovator is a division of Viva Biotech Holding, which is a CRO company. So our investment is including the cash, just like most other VC does, as well as we have, we call the equity for service. In the other word is we can work with partners or the portfolio company to provide a service as a CRO called the EFS. However, I just want to point out, it's not, we do not have to have the service to invest. So we are relatively independent, but do look for partnership, and hopefully is really not only for the cash investment, but as well as we can have support from the service perspective. So that's the key part as the criteria from Viva. And how to get access to us. I think is just like everybody else on the panel had talked about, is certainly kind of the email works, and also like RACI, this conference we really like a lot. We actually have several people kind of participating. So if you are looking for somebody to talk to, certainly feel free to look for Viva BioInnovator. We have several people participating, and you can schedule meeting with them. And around the world, around the 24 hours, because I'm in the US, we also have several partners kind of calling in from China. So, and I think I agree with the other panels. LinkedIn probably not the easiest way to get to me, but like conferences, as well as having people who knows either entrepreneurs or other connections with us, we are open from all kind of angles coming to the door. So hopefully that's to give people some sense of what we do here. So let's back to the next question I want to pose to the panelists here is I want everybody to share what is the current landscape of the early stage therapeutic investment and what is the outlook you see. Maybe this time we reverse the order. So have Sean start.
Thanks, Cynthia. So I can comment from what we see in our portfolio. So we support both academic projects as well as companies, as I mentioned earlier. And what we're seeing, especially on the the earlier stage side, is companies launching. This is obviously everybody on the panel here, as well as in the audience, with pretty large Series A rounds in the preclinical stage, and especially in the, for us, what's encouraging is seeing that in the stem cell space with the pluripotent stem cell based technologies. We're really encouraged by that, and especially stem cell derived therapies for cancer, as well as for neurological disorders. And so that's encouraging because they have enough money to really address the major challenges they're going to face going forward, especially around manufacturing. And so having that much capital on hand helps them think about the manufacturing challenges they're going to face as they scale up to later stage clinical trials. So that's an area that we find very encouraging. And outside of that, what we're seeing on the academic side is not only through our funding, but through funding from NIH, as well as these partnerships that a lot of the big pharma companies are making. You can actually progress an asset pretty far in academia these days, especially at the major universities, the UCLA's, the UC Berkeley's, UCSF, Stanford, and so on, where you can actually take a project that was in the basic biology stage, have some translational elements worked into it, take it all the way to the clinic with their partnering facilities that are there. And we have plenty of those. We have lots of projects that have gone where we supported them from kind of discovery through IND enabling studies, and now they're in phase 1-2 clinical trials, all having used CIRM funding, foundation funding, NIH funding, and so on. So that's also very encouraging. But one element that is missing with the academic projects that progress to these later stages in clinical trials is that the manufacturing component tends to sometimes lag. And so that aspect needs to be worked out going forward. So I hope that that's somewhat illuminating, but we see a lot of investment in terms of capital, both in companies and academic projects that are helping them get to the clinic relatively quickly.
Thank you, Sean. So Owen, how about you next? Share with us on the current landscape as well as the outlook.
Sure. So I think the current landscape in advanced therapies is it's a particularly hot area. I think we've all alluded to the fact that there are significant amounts of capital being invested into the space in mega rounds, which are often daunting and not really aligned with the stage of corporate and clinical development that a company should be at. I think particularly with canonical gene replacement gene therapy, there is a tendency to see large financings around for want of a better phrase, pipeline where effectively the clinical successes of peers such as Novartis through the acquisition of Avexis and Roche through the acquisition of Spark, who have approved gene therapies, and the lack of safety challenges to date and a degree of predictability of efficacy has meant that companies at a very early stage have clinical valuations baked into them. This is particularly apparent in gene therapy and cell therapy. It's also systemic across gene editing and RNA technologies. And it is a bit of a problem, as I think that there are a number of companies that could potentially come unstuck where their large cash reserves have been depleted and they haven't actually got too much to show for it. So I think where we're going over the next cycle of investment is really focusing on some of the technologies which are building on the success of gene therapy and cell therapy, where generalists are a little less comfortable and you can still build a biotech in a responsible way without raising sort of 200, 300 million. Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with those transactions. They clearly have delivered approvals, they work. But we're looking more at sort of second and third generation approaches. One of our portfolio companies, Sparing Vision, is developing a genotype agnostic therapy for retinitis pigmentosa, which we think, it's differentiated. It's not canonical gene replacement, and therefore real specialists can make a difference. Chemogenetics is another sort of platform we're keen to see build up and become more mainstream. But for us, the key thing is actually looking at the technologies which are hot and also taking a gauge of what's too hot. There is a surplus of capital, and it's creating a haves and have-nots in biotech. And as Noel mentioned before, a number of transactions sort of don't ever see the light of day and never have to do the conference circuit because they never leave venture capital groups, but certainly keen to look at sustainably built companies in the space.
Wonderful, thank you. Thank you. And how about Sanjay?
Okay, so I think we have seen we have made a comparative study in the average deal size in 2019 and 2020. For the CNS, we have seen a growth of more than 100% in the average deal size. In the nephrology area, we have seen a growth of 30 to 40% in the average deal size. And the field has been increasingly has remained increasingly competitive. But we are here with a very different model. MSRD is here with a very different kind of model. We are not taking any equity position. What we are offering is a short-term collaboration, that you complete your discovery program with us, you file the IND with us, and then complete the phase 1 or maybe phase 1B or 2B study with us, and then let's talk about a full acquisition or a full in-licensing deal afterwards. So we would, instead of making big equity investments, we are making collaborations in which we would have some rights to exclusively negotiate with the company at a later stage. This actually follows the OSCA principle or the OSCA philosophy, where we don't really think about maximizing either the value of our partner or ourselves. We think about only maximizing the value of our assets. So all our investment philosophy hinges on that we as a collaborator need to maximize the value of the asset that we are collaborating on. So in spite of facing this increasingly competitive environment, we have had some success in closing a couple of deals last year, and we are also looking forward to close a few of them this year.
Great, thank you. Noah, how about I think we changed the order a little bit.
It's an interesting question. Almost everyone here alluded to the amount of capital that is out there. which is true. Valuations have been pushed through the roof, as well as the amounts fundraised, because if there's a lot of people competing for a company, then your valuation will go up. But investors also need a certain percentage of your company, which means they have to invest more capital at a higher valuation, right? And so you see the deal sizes going up. You've also seen the valuations of the companies going up for a lot less than they've had to show in previous years. I, I, I mean, I don't necessarily think that's been so bad. Well, it depends on if you're a value investor or not, I guess. It's been a growth market for in the public markets and in the private markets for the past 5 years. But one thing that we like that we see here, despite kind of the competitive nature, is that as a industry as a whole, as VC investors, we see a lot more collaboration than there used to be with different groups. A lot of times traditionally you are viewing other VCs with similar size funds as competitors to who's going to get the lead positions. Now it's not so uncommon to see even 3 co-leads in a deal, because the deal sizes have gone up, which at the end of the day is good for the investors, because you're spreading some of the risk and taking off the burden of some of the director work. But also it's great for the company, because now you're getting 3 times the expertise that you would have before. And so while I agree that it's not ideal to have high valuations for everything and supersized rounds for everything, there are some benefits I think that you could try to see. There's some silver lining. And then from the therapeutic area perspective, or maybe it's easier to talk about modalities, right? I mean, gene therapy is still hot, cell therapies are still hot, and we see that a lot. The kind of interesting thing is the rise in infectious disease companies that are trying to ride that COVID wave currently, and we'll see how that goes, because at least for antimicrobials, for example, traditionally they've not been the best investment area. I mean, we've seen at least 2 bankruptcies over the past year and a half of big public companies that were supposed to be the next big antibiotics. So that's definitely a trend that has gone up, the number of infectious disease companies, and it is one of the major problems globally. So I hope to see some stability there post-COVID with the number of people working on those. But in general, capital is there for people who know how to reach out and get it. And I would assume that of the members kind of viewing this this panel, that people might have questions of, okay, how do we become the haves versus the have-nots, and how do we step into the group of entrepreneurs that can actually gain the capital? I'd say there's 2 things that is consistent with the record amount of fundraising going on, is that the teams are now much stronger in general for most startups that we see at the Series A stage. It's not uncommon to see someone with 20 years biopharma experience as part of that early team. And so, if you haven't built out some level of drug development expertise on your team, that's one thing I think you need to have now, because everybody has that. And then the second thing, as Shyam actually mentioned with academic work, is that you have to have more data than I think you used to. People are able to do more and more experiments within academia. You can even do high throughput screens in academia. Now, I don't honestly think academia is the right place to try to push forward drugs, because, I mean, first, academics don't know how to do that. I used to be one. And second of all, there's a lot of other considerations for drug development that you have to have when you're planning out your experiments. And I think that's more efficiently done within a company. But that being said, biological proof of principle is now almost taken for granted once you leave the lab. And so I think that's the other thing that I've seen, is that earlier and earlier stage companies have biological proof of principle already, as well as a good team. And those are the companies that we see raising decent Series A rounds, or even seed rounds, because a seed round can be $6 to $10 million now. Cynthia, you're on mute.
Yes, I'm on mute. Yeah, let me share a little bit about what I have seen, what are the hot area or what is the current situation and moving forward. So first of all, from the indication perspective is really, I think oncology obviously is still very hot, but that's probably going down a little bit. And I know everybody hate it and everybody is so desperate want to do it. This CNS, especially like Alzheimer's disease, and including myself, both professionally and personally, really want to have this kind of as an industry we can break through. But it's clearly that's still the hardest area, both from the diagnostic perspective as well as the therapeutic perspective. However, I do see this investment is getting more and more. I actually just read the report from a Silicon Valley Bank today, and the CNS area had investment jump up very, very significantly. I think people may not go into the therapeutic directly, but it's really trying different angle of looking at that. So that's an area as an early stage investor, I'm definitely looking at that, and this may not be the time to invest yet, but I'm paying very close attention or anything related to that. And the other part is the platform, and right now more and more I think is not. I think the single assay is a little bit difficult to raise the money. Even though for Viva, actually, we do not against those, since we are the CRO, we believe if truly have a good assay, we can help to provide support. So I have some synergy in there. But in general, I guess right now the trend is still people want to have a platform or at least a series of pipeline there. The other trend I see is the AI assist drug development. And I think in the past, just like many other panel had mentioned, is coming out of the academic institution. But right now, more and more people are looking at have the AI assist. From that perspective, I personally really like the company, not purely from a computer perspective or big data, whatever we call, but it's really have a good combination of the scientists together. So really understand the drug development perspective with the AI to provide some support. So that's also, I think, another hot area. And also some specifically, for some reason, suddenly this PROTACs kind of protein degradation becomes hot again. I don't know why is that. And personally, I have some portfolios in this area, so I'm continuing kind of looking at that as well. So from a big picture perspective is I know right now the gene therapy, cell therapy becomes very hot, but once again, personally, and also because of the company, I think Viva as a CRO, we provide services for both, for all the small molecule biologic as well as gene therapy and cell therapy. So I don't want to discount the small molecule. Here is I still believe there are a lot of potentials over there. Obviously, will not overlook the gene therapy and cell therapy, really kind of looking at the potential in that area as well. So that's probably from my personal perspective here. Before I go to the next question, I want to encourage the people online, if you have some question, especially is general for all the panelists, please type into the chat box. And I think we might have a couple minutes to answer one or two questions at the end. So I encourage the audience, if you have something not very specific, if it's specific, I know all the panels here are trying to answer the question along the way. But if you have some particular question to address for all of us, please type in. We will try to get into it. All right. So the next question I want to pose to the panelists here is want to be more practical. So can you share one or two suggestions or either case study or some general kind of tips and tricks for the entrepreneurs or startups here? What are some of the do and don'ts? So this could be either for kind of startup companies or for like a scientific entrepreneurs, which I know there are some of them out there as well. So maybe who want to go first? So this one I won't call, just who want to go first, please?
I can take it, Cynthia.
Please. Yeah.
So I think the first thing that I would like to talk about here is that if you have data, if you have the right IP and the right team, please showcase that. Please don't hold back. The right IP, the right team, and the right data, they are the key ingredients for us to be interested in the proposal that we receive. Number two is, if you are following up with us, please, you understand that you are making our life easier. There could be so many things that are stuck in the pipeline. If we get a reminder from you, that only helps us to pump up that and also clearly showcases your interest in partnering with MSRD or OTSCA in general. So I would just call that two aspects out. Number one, showcase your strengths, and number two, if you don't receive any response from us, please don't feel shy to nudge us, give us a nudge or two. Okay, that would be really appreciated because they make our life easier.
Thank you, Sanjay. Who is next? Some tips and tricks or a case study. Yeah.
Sure, I guess I can jump in. I think to follow on from Sanjit's point, I think one thing that's really important is ultimately we invest in the three things that he mentioned in terms of technology, IP, and most importantly, people. So I think it's important to sort of be open, honest with what you have, what you don't have, what your plans are, what your visions are. I'll sort of say there's two ways of thinking about it. If you are an entrepreneur looking to form a company, don't spread yourself too thinly. Try and speak to a couple of groups who you think might be tempted to corral around your story, can actually give you the input you need ahead of actually going down a concrete drug development campaign. This can be anything to do with indication, to do with your clinical approach, to do with sort of what screening and additional experiments you want to have in advance of a Series A. And there are a number of investors, including ourselves, who have worked with companies and founders for sort of extended run-in periods prior to a financing. For example, one of the companies I'm working with closely that we haven't sort of publicly announced yet, I've been involved with the company for a year, but before that, before even investing, we were working with them for 18 months, pulling together and building the business plan. If you're a formed company, you're a somewhat different proposition. So I'd encourage you to sort of follow Sanjit's advice and make sure you have answers to the key questions around your preclinical validation, your clinical strategy, justification of why you may be best in class or first in class, and also a clear vision for what you want to do with the company. It's perfectly valid to say we want to get to IND and sell this company. But sort of spreading yourself too thinly and not sort of having a conviction based on your investor base or based on your own view is sort of somewhat difficult. As Sanjit said, we see a lot of things, as Noel mentioned, it's 20, 30 things a day at times, and so sort of actually having to do the unraveling can sometimes be the difference between getting that second meeting. I think we're all fairly approachable as people. We try to be. It's part of what we try to do. But you have a narrow window. I'd encourage people to sort of be very thoughtful in first outreach. And if I had one easy win, it's know your investor and think about how we can get them off a partnering system for a conference. Sorry to the host of this conference. We tend not to go back on after the conference, but if you're sending a scattergun email which hasn't considered who your investor is, you're very unlikely to get a response. With us being an advanced therapies investor, exclusively focused on therapeutics, I'm apologizing in advance. I'm probably not going to reply if you're a digital health company.
So I'd say that's pretty sound advice that from both Owen and Samjit that I would agree with completely. For example, where we don't invest in therapeutic assets, if you have a single molecule, small molecule, and you have a target and you're going to take this molecule through IND and then through the clinic, we're not that type of investor. Not that there's tons of those companies anymore, but we just don't do that. And there are groups that reach out saying, hey, can you fund our phase 1b trial? And I mean, the answer is no, we cannot do that because we never invest in those. So knowing your investor is definitely important. And yes, as I mentioned before, the data is usually the hook, and then everything else needs to follow, including the team and IP and everything else that goes with it. So as Owen just mentioned, when you email, please make sure that you are hooking the right investor with the right thing that you think they'll be interested in. Otherwise, quite honestly, if I have 20 emails with company pitches, I also have 80 other emails from non-company pitches that I have to answer, and chances are the emails will not get answered. So knowing your investor, making sure you're putting the right data in there to hook them into a meeting, I think is quite important, because at the very least, everyone will still glance at whatever you send them. One other thing I'd say as kind of a tip for those who, I mean, chances are if you are one of those companies that will go out and raise a $30 million Series A immediately, you have the right, university professor who has the right connections to the right VCs, and you're off and running, and you don't have to worry about fundraising as much. But for the vast majority of people, how do you get to that level, right? I mean, I would say if I started a company today, for example, and I left VC, I wouldn't have any of that. But we have seen over and over again companies that are started by people who are just postdocs or grad students at one point in their life, and they don't have that support network because they're not spinning out of a fancy university with some fancy investors. But what we have seen is that they have shown that they can recruit the right people to their team. And sometimes it's not actually getting someone full-time who has that 20 years of pharma experience. Sometimes it's putting together the right scientific advisory board with the top people in whatever therapeutic area you're looking at. And guess what? These professors tend to be very well connected in the biotech industry, and they can also help you recruit other people. So if you have an entrepreneur that does not have the same support network as some other companies might, but have shown that through their hustle that they can recruit the right people to help them, that's a big plus sign, and we're willing to take a chance on a team that's not fully built out, but where you have a CEO who's demonstrated that they can actually recruit the right people, even if it's the early stages.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Sean? Yeah.
Aggressively agree with everything that panelists have said so far with respect to science, IP, and team, and then doing your homework when you're talking to any VC or any sort of funding agency. Yeah, I kind of want to extend that best practices to what you do after you've gotten funding. So with respect to what we do on our side, we give out the awards, and then we actually, for many of our programs, especially the clinical ones, we set up an advisory panel where that meets periodically. It could be as much as a few times a year. And that panel is designed to help the project navigate through their immediate milestones as well as future events that they need to be thinking about. We'll bring in external advisors. It could be manufacturing, clinical trial enrollment, physicians, whoever it might be, to help that project. And what we find is that the awardees, the companies, academics, whoever they may be, who are the most transparent in when they're presenting their project. These are confidential meetings, but the ones who do their homework, to present all of their data, all of their plans, and who are receptive to getting advice from the external advisors and CERM advisors as well, get the most out of it, right? So you're coming in there with an attitude that I'm going to be upfront about where my project is at. I'm going to receive any feedback that I get, and I'm going to work off of that. It helps and makes a big difference going forward in that project and how it executes. So it doesn't, the best practices don't end once you get the check. They keep going and they actually become more amplified downstream of that. It's important to remember those as well. And, you know, if you're a good, I guess, entrepreneur, you're a good fundee, we remember that, right? And that plays off down the road as well in terms of making connections and getting funding for your future rounds and so on. So it's all important. And I'm going to echo what Noel said with respect to you know, the academics themselves being very well connected. And I give an example of that recently. So both CERM and NIH together were funding Matt Porteous's CRISPR gene therapy work at Stanford, and we were funding the IND enabling work as well as their vector manufacturing. And when it came time to spin that out, somebody like Matt had no problems setting up a company, getting venture investments, and actually pulling in senior executives from companies that have developed sickle cell-based therapies in the past. And so, you know, it was a perfect combination of stuff. There's Stanford, a well-known academic, and a project that had funding all the way up to IND enabling, IND filing. So, you know, those types of things matter. And if you have those types of people on your advisory panels in your companies, they know that they can line up those same resources they did for their own companies for your company as well.
Thank you, Sean, for the share. So from my perspective, very much agree with everybody had talked, and also very much agree talking about how important data is. However, as the last one, I want to also emphasize, especially for the scientific entrepreneurs, just data is not enough. So I want to make sure when you are pitching the investors, have the clear picture of the story. What are you truly trying to do to help to the world? Is since I oftentimes get lost, not oftentimes, several times get lost, is keep talking about the science, but what's the matter of that? So that's also very important to make sure you have the story really kind of lined up. Because as an investor, especially the early stage investor, just like most people had talked about, we look at least three things. So the number one priority is really looking at the people, because at this point, we don't know if the science is going to work, going to have some risk for sure. So the people is always number one for me. And then the second is the market. So really, whatever the science are really trying to address, if they are significant potential as an unmet need or have a potential commercial value to it, because we are investor here, so obviously it's looking for the return of the investment. And the number three is definitely the science, which we had talked a lot about this. And then obviously number four, especially for the CVC like Aviva, is we also look at some of the strategic fit. In this case, is we are looking at only the therapeutic, so it's still actually pretty broad. So based on understanding all the investors is thinking pretty much in those lines, so make sure you have your story pretty clear and be able to clearly communicate. And that's the way is the best way to get us to get into the second meeting, I think everybody's talking about. So I think we have a couple questions on the line here. I may open that up for the team, for the panelists to kind of contributing here. Let me do the last question first, since I think this is the easy one. So from Leon is how are the investors syndicate formed? Do the entrepreneurs have to arrange the syndicate between individual VCs and try to group them, or do VCs share interest between other trusted VCs and form a syndicate when eligible? So anybody want to kind of share your thought?
Sure, I'll take it to start with. I'm sure everyone has had different experiences, but in short, there is no one answer. Ultimately, this is an industry which is where great science is underpinned by personal connections which are built over a period of time through due diligence and extended experience working with people. It may well be that you don't have investor connections, but those can take time. As we've all mentioned, we see a number of opportunities. If you have a clear, coherent story, which is, there is a clear unmet need, and you're speaking to investors and not getting traction, there's clearly something that may need revising. If you can get the interest of one group, part of what we do is take a company from sort of the oven to sort of the plate, and we can connect with VCs. If you've got a group of people you're speaking with, I think prior to sort of getting firmly aligned or writing a term sheet or accepting a term sheet, is useful to get the like-minded groups to discuss it in advance. One of the things that I have as a pet hate is companies shopping a deal and aiming to get multiple term sheets playing against each other. As Noel mentioned, this is actually a very collaborative industry. We like to syndicate in the majority of instances, unless you're managing 30, 40 billion and you can afford to do it all yourself, you are going to need friends. So I appreciate that's not a direct answer. If you have connections, sort of take the most advanced one and connect them with some groups when the time is right. If you don't have any work on finding that one person who's happy to put their hand up and have the confidence really, and be able to stake a degree of reputational capital on the line to say to other groups, I think this is good. Do you want to come along for the story with us?
Thank you, Owen. And we are pretty much getting to the end of the time here. I just want to say thank you to all the panelists for your participation, and thank you to all the audience to participate. And also thank you for the Life Science Nation to organize this wonderful meeting.